Look at tomorrow's front pages. The Guardian says Britain and the US are pressing for UN sanctions against 18 former senior Taliban figures to be lifted, a sign that peace talks could be on the way. The Independent says a panel of world figures, including Kofi Annan, are calling for cannabis and ecstasy to be legalised. The Eye looks at the E. coli scare that first broke out in Germany but has now been found in the UK. Meanwhile, the FT shows angry Spanish farmers in Valencia dumping fruit and vegetables outside the German consulate. The Daily Mail reports that 7 people in the UK now have the E. coli strain. E. coli even also leading the Telegraph. They warn the new strain of the bug could spread from person to person. While the Express says that everyone in Britain should be washing all fruit and vegetables to try to avoid it. Meantime, The Star says the TV show Britain's Got Talent is facing allegations of fixing. BGT and Fix claim shock, their headline. Well, I'm joined now by the poet and journalist Olivia Cole to talk about those stories in more detail. E. coli dominating, I guess, but you've picked The Guardian to start off with.
Yes, to start with, The Guardian's splash is on... It's an exclusive story suggesting that the US and Britain are ready for peace negotiations in Afghanistan. We've already heard earlier this week, concerns from the military about what is going to happen when there start to be less troops on the ground. I mean, this is an interesting story. Obviously, it's optimistic to talk about sitting down together, but the figures they're talking about are some of the most notorious people that we know about, and we associate the Taliban with terrible affronts on women's rights, and these are exactly the people that they're saying are going to be free to move, free to have bank accounts. So it's a controversial story, I think.
Atrocities and ambitions to continue to run
Afghanistan,
as they did in the olden days.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's one thing, to say they're ready to negotiate and put down arms. Well, for how long, I think, is the big question there.
But The Guardian spells it out, I guess. The paper saying officials believe the move would send a clear signal to insurgents that reintegration into Afghan society is possible if they put down their arms. And that is the crucial next step, of course.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I think it also asks the question, what is this war about? Is it about the war on terror and a threat to the West, or is it also a moral war and about the people in Afghanistan who, unfortunately not the troops leaving, are going to be the people left there long after the fighting stops?
Well, certainly Britain and the United States could both look at the success of Northern Ireland, where talks began,
exactly.
And we've seen the peace process result. But many people will point to the fact that this is possibly an unwinnable war, so something has to change.
Yes, exactly. So I think on the whole it's an optimistic development.
The other story they've got here, scientists say E. coli strain is new and most virulent. This is the story on most of the papers. A strain of E. coli spreading across Europe is a previously unseen and more virulent variant of the bacterium. And this is the sort of story that we've seen really dominating most of the newspapers.
It is. I mean, that's quite a restrained headline. They're all scary headlines, but actually it is frightening. They don't know where it's coming from. It is, the most virulent strain. So sort of restraint there, but, a scary headline
we'll come
for
back
all
to
the papers covering that, I think.
We'll come back to that one in just a moment. Meantime, on to the Independent.
Yes,
drugs.
This is drugs. This is the call to legalise cannabis and ecstasy. I think it's quite interesting. We've had the story today, and the Independent are leading with pictures of figures like Kofi Annan. They haven't got Sting and Judi Dench and celebrities involved, Richard Branson, on their front page, which I think is quite interesting. I mean, these people are passionate about this cause as well. They're saying, the way we've tried to wage war on drugs hasn't worked, and yet you wonder if perhaps sort of rock and roll celebrity involvement slightly makes it seem a sort of lefty, liberal, rock and roll cause. And I think, the arguments are laid out here. It doesn't work. It's a waste of resources to be trying to catch, petty drug dealers and users or people using cannabis for medicinal reasons. But actually, beyond this, I can't see David Cameron saying, yeah, you're right. The research says I'm going to be the PM to legalise cannabis. I mean, Cameron never wants to talk about drugs anyway, and I think that's going to be a stumbling block. Although it's good to open up the debate.
Well, they haven't got Richard Branson as one of the pictures they've picked out, but we have heard from him, so let's listen to Richard Branson.
The good news is that new approaches focused on regulation and decriminalisation have proven to work in a number of countries, and obviously Portugal is a really good example of one. Well, we need more leaders to start looking at alternatives and to look at fact-based approaches. We need more humane and we need more effective ways to reduce the harm caused by drugs. The one thing we cannot afford to do is to go on pretending that the war on drugs is working.
Well, Sir Richard, they're adding his voice to the Global Commission on Drug Policy. Fascinating that as well as the UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, there's former presidents on this, Brazil, Mexico and Colombia. Colombia, one of the big drug-producing problem areas of the world.
Exactly, and I mean, the argument would be it's a problem for the world stage, but it raises an eyebrow as well.
OK, well, let's move on to the FT. Care Home Watchdog has staff shortfall, the paper in the middle there on the paper.
This is an interesting story about the Care Quality Commission, really, with both of the terrible stories about care this week. The buck stops with this body, which has, not been able to help the residential homes of the elderly and also failed to pick up on the failings at Winterbourne. And the interesting development in this story is the fact that there are about 150 people down on inspectors, precisely the people whose job it is to make sure, abuse isn't going on. And this is being blamed in this FT story squarely on the bonfire of the Quangos. It says here, the sharp reduction in personnel reflects David Cameron's hiring freeze on so-called arm's-length bodies, or Quangos. I mean, it has become a very, fashionable phrase to talk about getting rid of Quangos and it's a waste of resources. Now, actually, arm's-length bodies here perhaps could have helped, particularly in the Bristol case. It wasn't the people on the ground. If this had been picked up, and we know about the whistleblower who was ignored. So I think that's, an interesting way of taking this story on.
Who promised the bonfire of the Quangos?
Yes, well, I mean, it's one of those things like, where does the buck stop? I mean, it stops in all manner of places, but there are some specific statistics here about the cut in budget of the CQC, the shortage in staff, and I mean, of course, part of you thinks, particularly in the Winterbourne case, it doesn't matter how short-staffed you are, surely someone who was employed there, knew what was going on. But I think it's part of the wider story for sure.
The other picture story they've got on the FT is Hold the Tomato. Spanish farmers launch protest. Angry Spanish farmers in Valencia dump fruit and veg outside the German consulate. Testing has revealed that the E. coli outbreak was not linked to cucumbers produced in Spain, as German authorities originally suspected.
Yeah,
that's part of the story, isn't it?
It is, and with a lot of these food scare stories, whether it's bird flu or swine flu, the blame usually comes back to the meat eaters, and it's intensive farming, and it's to do with carnivores. Here, OK, it's not the Spanish cucumbers, but the consensus does seem to be that it's a problem with salad
real
and vegetables.
Economic impact,
yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
It, certainly. Just hearing, actually, that there have been a number of explosions in Tripoli, 4, I think, so far. Talking to our correspondent, Lisa Holland, very shortly. I don't know if she's there now. Not yet. OK, well, let's continue with this one till she comes back. So 4 explosions in Tripoli. Once again, we're seeing sustained NATO bombardments of the Libyan capital. Spain threatening legal action over the crisis. Not surprising, perhaps. It wants compensation for its farmers,
yes, exactly.
Who say they lost sales relating to €200 million a week, which could put 70,000 people out of work. So very serious consequences for Spain. But the Express has a different take on this story, taking the public health part of this story. Killer food bug hits Britain.
Yeah, their headline has got more carried away than The Guardian and The Telegraph. Wash all fruit and veg. I mean, this is really about consumers. And again, on the economic point, wash all fruit and veg. Yes, OK, if you're buying everything you eat and you know where it comes from and you prepare it yourself. But in economic terms, I mean, what does this do for... there's not going to be anyone in Europe, I think, ordering a salad in a restaurant and not fretting. Yeah, but the killer food bug hasn't really hit Britain in the sense that 7 people here have been struck down. And they've all been to Germany.
They've all been to northern Germany. 3 of them are Britons, 4 are German nationals. They've been to Germany, got it, and come back here. It's not the same as whatever is causing this actually being here, is it?
Yes,
so
exactly. I mean, that's an alarming front page, and you hope, it's infectious, but hopefully it's not going to cause a massive outbreak here.
And no suggestion that you can't eat tomato, cucumber or salad in this country, certainly. Let's move on to the Telegraph if we can. MI6 hackers hit terrorist website with cupcakes. What a fascinating story.
Now, this is a lighter spin on, hacking and terrorism. I'm no expert in spying, but MI6 strategically hacked into a magazine for aspiring terrorists, and the technology that they used meant that when people tried to download a recipe to make a bomb in your mother's kitchen, they ended up with a recipe for cupcakes. It's fascinating. Why cupcakes? I mean, why not American apple pie or some other, British export? I mean, it's extraordinary. It's an insight into their methods, and it is slightly a story. If it was in April, you'd think it was an April Fool.
But quite an intriguing take. Somebody else suggested it should be in a James Bond movie.
And also, it's terrifying that, OK, these articles have been replaced, but the fact that you can find recipes for bombs that easily with a quick Google, again, the darker side of the story.
Olivia Cole, thank you very much indeed. I know you're back again for our full press preview at 11:30, and also joining us will be the media commentator Kim Fletcher, so we'll see you shortly. Happy reading of the papers, but let's return to that news then of what's happening in Tripoli. Sky's Foreign Affairs correspondent Lisa Holland on the line for us from there. Tell us what's been happening tonight then, Lisa.
Hi, Anna. 4 explosions in the last couple of minutes. It's just before 11:45, 11:45 midnight local time here. I think in a general southwesterly direction,